Okay, time to start. And like I said in my other class, if you haven't got a little test, then let me know so I can forward that to you. I think I did that in a PDF form so that everybody can open it up, no matter what your computer is. We're going to start this evening on page 267. We're going to talk about the Lord's Supper for a little bit. Then we're going to get into the divided assembly. Yes. But I wanted to deal with this because I think this helps us in studying the church. And if we're studying with other people, we need to know some of this. We may not use it all, but I think some of this we need to understand. Because we have brethren that are wanting to change the elements. They're saying that the bread and the fruit of the vine can be changed. Cornbread and buttermilk, hot dogs and hot dog buns, or that type of thing. Don't think it can be. I wouldn't want to be. To me, that's like Nadab and Abihu. That's like the issues that we've seen here in doing things that God did not authorize. When God authorized something, that rules out everything else. Usually what we have to deal with is the frequency, though. When we're discussing this with somebody from a different religious orientation, we have to talk about the frequency with that event. And really, when you look at your Bible in 1 Corinthians 16, and I would ask them, usually I ask them, do they give every first day of the week? And they say, yes. I said, where's your authority? Well, I don't know. I said, well, let me help you. Okay, now concerning the collection of the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. And I've had some brethren who say that this is not an order for us today. Okay, and they'll say,
class on this very passage. I've been studying it all week.
Okay.
Which one are we in?
Well,
267.
267, but I've also 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. So what have you come up with on the idea of orders?
So that word is used about 16 times in the New Testament, and it presupposes a subordinate relationship of one who is commanded to do something.
Commanded.
Correct.
Okay.
And the literal translation, so the text provides precedence for how any and all congregations are authorized to be.
Any and all congregations. Okay.
Yep.
So really, I usually deal with this. Military, they were given orders. Do they have an option of obeying it or not?
Not good.
As a firefighter, if I was given an order, I had to obey that order unless I thought my life was in danger. That's the only time when I did not have to obey an order. Okay. So here's the orders. But yes, there are some brethren who are teaching that this is not for us today.
And that Greek expression literally means every first day of the week.
All right, now we haven't got to that one yet, but that's true. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you. Now, if I told you I was going to pay you on Friday, when are you going to come get your paycheck? Okay, which Friday?
Every Friday.
Every Friday.
Including Sunday.
But wait a minute, I didn't say every Friday. But when I told you Friday, that implied every Friday. This is not implied. Okay, so the idea then upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. There's some more interesting things. I hope that you have lay by him in store. And what that's a common church treasury.
Treasure, yeah, which corresponds to every. The word literally translates treasury, I believe.
Yes. As God's prosperity, that there be no gatherings when I come. So
It's not, keep it at your house.
that's right. That is absolutely right.
Yep.
Now, what I have them to do is hold their finger at Acts chapter, or 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, and then turn over to Acts chapter 20 and verse 7. And you don't have to be a Greek scholar to understand this. But this upon the first day of the week, and for the first day of the week in 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2 is exactly the same. Now, I don't have to be a Greek scholar. All I have to do is say, okay, that letter's the same, that letter's the same, that letter's the same, that letter's the same. So therefore, that word's the same. And you can do that for that whole phrase on the first day of the week. And I've done that. And it literally means every first day of the week. That's when they came together. Now, I also want to deal with another passage. And let's go to Acts chapter 2. And he's going to do this in the book. But I want to do this.
What?
Acts 2. Okay. First of all, we're going to establish that the day of Pentecost. Okay. When was the day of Pentecost? All right. Now we can know this from Leviticus 23 verses 15 and 16. You number 7 Sabbaths complete, and the morrow after the 7th Sabbath is 50. So 7 times 7 is 49, plus the morrow after the Sabbath, which would be the first day of the week. Then that's 50. All right. And that's where this comes from then. So this fell on the first day of the week. Now, all of this took place in Acts chapter 2 upon the first day of the week. So let's drop down. We know that some 3,000 then were baptized. Look at verse 42. 41 says there were 3,000 souls, and they continued steadfastly in number 1, the apostles' doctrine, and number 2, the fellowship, number 3, the breaking of bread, and number 4 is in prayers. And verse 47, praising God. So there's 5 acts of worship. When did they do them? On the first day of the week. Okay. Now you say breaking of bread. Now he uses the idea of the breaking of bread. I don't think that may be there. But here are items of worship all together. And that's what they were doing. Now, if you'll grow later on in this chapter, look at verse number 46. And they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. That's not worship. That's a common meal. And the context then tells us this is worship and this is a common meal. So I see this in Acts chapter 2, verse 42 as worship service. And now when you study Acts chapter 2 and verse 42, you write, okay, what's apostles' doctrine? They continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. What's apostles' doctrine? Teaching.
Teaching.
All right. What corresponds to our teaching?
Preaching.
Preaching. All right. Fellowship. Okay. All right. And you may be dealing with somebody who doesn't know. So you write fellowship, and then over here you say, okay, we're going to study this one. All right. Breaking of bread. Well, that's the Lord's Supper. And prayers. We understand what that one is. And then praising God. That's singing. So here's 5 items. What does fellowship have to do with? Now, when you get to studying fellowship and giving, that will really make if you can get that idea across to people, it will make our giving mean more than just dropping something in the collection plate as it passed by. We are having joint participation, all of us, with God in this. All right, so now let's go back to Acts chapter 20 and deal with something there too. Acts chapter 20. We're going to start with verse 7. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, what was their purpose?
Break bread.
All right, to worship. Okay, folks, if we get the idea that the breaking of bread is the most important thing we do at our worship, we need to rethink our worship. Every act of worship is as important as another. I guarantee you, though, you'll have people come into your worship, take the Lord's Supper, and leave.
Well, there are congregations that will take the Lord's Supper to a shut-in or something like
Yes.
that. But
Yes.
that's all they do. They won't take the singing or the teaching.
Well, I tell them when I'm a part of that, this is what you need to do. You need to have all of this. And you need to give them the opportunity to give, too. And so,
When my mother was in rehab, we took the Lord's Supper and we sang a couple songs and she did devotional and we prayed and everything.
Yeah.
And she said she wanted to worship. And that's not just
Well,
worship,
yeah.
it's just the Lord's Supper.
yeah. So if they're going to do that, I don't push that. If the elders want to do that, that's fine. If somebody wants that, that's fine. But I just not going to sit up here. And, if you're sick enough that you can't come to worship, then yes. Yes. But here were the disciples then. And I think this, when he says breaking of bread, it is just a part of the whole. And he's talking about their worship.
Didn't Paul wait here?
Yeah.
The purpose in waiting was to be
To
there.
be there. That's right. Yeah, if you go up to verse 6, and he abode there 7 days. And this is when Paul was on one of his journeys. Now, and he continued to speak to midnight, and there were many lights in the upper chamber where they were gathered together. Now, when did they partake the Lord's Supper? What time of day? At night, okay. Now, there's a group of people that would tell you you can't take the Lord's Supper at night. And I had them tell me that. That's why I know that there are some who will tell you that.
You think God sleeping?
No. Let's say that it needs to be done in the morning, and you don't need to offer it in the evening.
We have someone who won't come to Bible class on Sunday morning because it's in the morning.
Yeah.
But yet they come to worship. And I said, but you come to Wednesday night. Well, that's not the morning. I'm like,
Well.
head against the floor.
There's a group then, and I've had a written debate with them, pretty much on this idea, and they said you can't offer it in the evening, and I said we have more precedents to offer it at night than we do during the daytime. But they said what they're trying to do is if you don't come in the morning, then you're not worthy enough, and you don't think highly enough to take it in the evening. You've missed morning worship, and therefore you've missed something.
So if you have a sick child and the parents take
Swap out, then they don't do that. All right, and you could swap that with anybody. If you have a sick mama, or you have somebody that works, they can't get there in the morning, or whatever. We go wacky, we really do. But anyway, that's what they say. And there sat in the window a certain man named Eutychus, being fallen deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep. Now, folks, understand something. If people fall asleep while you're preaching, don't feel bad. It happened to the Apostle Paul. It's going to happen to you. And fell down from the third loft, and when he was taken up, dead. Now, I tell folks, if you fall asleep and you fall down dead, you dead. I'm not going to raise you up. I can't do that. Paul went down and fell on him and embraced him, said, trouble not yourselves, for his life is still in him. When, therefore, he was come up again and had broken bread and eaten and talked a long while, even to the break of day, so he departed. And they brought the young man alive and were not a little comforted. Now, Acts chapter, verse 7 or 11, either one you want to take, the Lord's Supper. I think they had a common meal in verse 11. He doesn't agree with that. He thinks that this is what the events that are taking place.
He says that the preaching is not Saturday evening.
Yes, that was our first day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
But really, if you think then that they came together then after, really, verse 11 would say after midnight. So that would be the first day of the week, whether you're talking about Jewish calendar or the Gentile calendar. It wouldn't make any difference. If Acts chapter 20, verse 11, if that is the Lord's Supper, it wouldn't make any difference which calendar you use. It's still the first day of the week. Okay. So there's the idea. Now, There is the process then in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 20, and also 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 16, the Lord's Supper and communion. And he says in those chapters also, as often as ye come together. Well, how often did the Christians come together? Every first day of the week, okay? So what is the significance of the first day of the week? This would be the second paragraph on page 268. And if you don't have this down, I would get this down. Mark 16:1, Luke 23:1, John chapter 20 and verse 1. Matthew 28. He doesn't have Matthew chapter 28 and verse 1. All of those. It's the last chapter, first verse, except John. John is the next to the last chapter, and it's still in verse 1. All of those took place on the first day of the week, resurrection. Okay? So he uses Leviticus 23 and verse 15 there. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, and Acts chapter 20 and verse 7. So we have established then that it's upon the first day of the week. Now, if we look at Pentecost and what was taking place on Pentecost, it's only going to be it's only going to be unleavened bread, and it's only going to be grape juice. It's not going to be wine. It's going to be grape juice, because wine has fermentation in it. It has leaven in it, and they're not going to have leaven in their house. So it's grape juice. I don't have a problem with that. And there's other reasons why, more logical reasons to use grape juice rather than wine. Some people want to use wine. The Bible just says fruit of the vine, so use fruit of the vine. And he does Acts chapter 2 and verse 42 and then verse 46, and he says the breaking of bread. I haven't studied that, but that's what he says there in this. And so I'm not going to dispute him. So pretty much that's what we've talked about. On page 271, he's got 1 Corinthians chapter 11, 23 through 39, and then 16, 1 and 2. The main purpose of 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is how of the Lord's Supper, not when. But he talks about as oft, until, and when. And he's got those things as oft. If you study this as oft, you'll find that it's, when they came together. And it's what he's talking about there. So, on page 272, on the footnote number 3, for example, the Didache, written about 120 AD, speaks of Christians coming together each Lord's Day and breaking bread. Justin Martyr wrote in his Apology, which would be about 152, of Christians meeting on Sunday, partaking of the communion. So we have a sacred history and we have secular history, all telling us that they came together.
I don't understand. And they say, we're going to have once a quarter and once a month. There's no consistency.
No. All right. Now, let's talk about 274, Children's Church, and we're going to talk about some other things here, too. Okay. Divided assemblies. He's got 3 groups on that first paragraph. Sunday night cluster groups. Number 2, he's got contemporary worship service. And number 3, children's worship. Now, I work out with a Baptist, and they do have the contemporary worship service. So this is something that's bleeding over into the church. And we've talked about mechanical instruments and music and that type of Sunday night cluster groups. When the congregation then is divided into several small groups, and they meet then in separate homes for Sunday evening services. If you can't see this, a problem with this, wake up, okay? Number 1 with this idea, who's in control of these groups? The elders are not in control of it. Well, you've got an elder meeting. Most of the time you have so many small groups that you don't have enough elder to be in each group. That still doesn't. Too much can happen in a small group, and too much dissension can happen, and too much then division can happen because they're meeting in small groups. that's, to me, the biggest dissension against, or the biggest problem with these small groups. The elders are not in control, and they need to be in control. They watch for our souls. And he gives then some of this wide. And Lynn Anderson, who insists on spiritual growth is nurtured more effectively in small group relationships than under powerful preaching. I don't believe that, because it's through the foolishness of preaching that men are saved. And so we need to understand that. We need to keep that in our goal and in our mind. That's what we need to be doing, is preaching the word. They even say that the house churches in the New Testament parallel the Sunday night clusters. No, they don't. In the New Testament, when they have house churches, I don't know if you've ever been to a place where you've had to meet in the houses. I have. Okay. When I was younger, the church was so small in some places that it had to meet in our home, and it did meet in our home. But that was a church. Everybody was invited. This was not just a division of it. It was the whole group. And that's what he's talking about in the first century. These house churches in Romans chapter 16, verses 3 through 5, that's what he's talking about. A house church, that was the church located in that area. The whole church then met there. So, you know something, let me do that.
Until recently, the Madison Church of Christ, that's where they had to meet within someone's home until
Yes.
they built their building.
Yeah. Is it Acts 23:17? No, that's not it.
What are you looking
14. Is it 14? 23. All right, look at Acts chapter 14, verse 23. And when they had ordained them elders in every church, and they prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord on whom they believed. So how many churches had elders? Every church. Now, let's go to Titus chapter 1 and verse 5, and let me show you how some people can get confused. For this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city. So how many churches were in the city? There's one church in the city, if that's what, yeah. Acts chapter 14, verse 23, and this then Titus chapter 1, verse 5. That's the only way you can conclude that, to draw that out. Hebrews chapter 13. Verse 7. It says, remember them which have the rule over you, and have spoken to you the word of God, whose faith follow, considering the end of their conversation. That's talking about the elders. Verse 17, obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they must give an account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you. So we need to obey the elders, but the elders don't have the right to sit.
Look at Romans 16:5. It says, likewise, greet the church that is in their house.
Yes. And it's,
so it says the church was being held in their house.
That's right. And also, when you look at Philemon, he was having the church there in his house too. Yeah. Okay. Maybe Colossians chapter 4 would bring that out to light too. But so this is not then, these separating into these clusters is not the same thing as the house churches in the first century.
Aquila and Priscilla also held their church in their house.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now, notice on page 275, the second paragraph, it's about the middle of the page, You see the footnote or the that number 3 right there?
Mhm.
All right, drop down to the next. This story conflicts with the alternate explanation that rural Christians had to travel many miles for Sunday morning worship. So after worship, remained together to eat dinner on the grounds, and after the meal, the Christians would worship together before undertaking the long journey back to their homes. I think that's happened when we had horse-drawn buggies. There was another reason for this. Most of the time, these folks were farmers. When did you milk your cows and slop your hogs and feed your chickens? In the morning. What'd you do before the evening? You had to milk your cows again. I don't know about slopping the hog and feed the chicken, but I know you had to milk your cows again. So you had to get done then. In between, you had to get this worship done, and that's when they did this. Okay? All right. Now, meeting twice on Sunday and once on Wednesday in order to have multiple opportunities to worship and to be present in the entire church. There's benefit. When you look at us coming together in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is. There's benefit in us coming together. Okay? One of that is so that we can have fellowship one with another. I think we have fellowship outward and we have fellowship upward. And, so there is this idea of us coming together. Plus the elders say come together. We obeyed them to have the rule over us. And so we need to be there. I think some congregations are doing this, again, having this worship and then eating and then worship again, all within a certain amount of times.
Sometimes you spend more hours at the church building than you do with the two separate times.
Yeah.
If you stay
Right.
together like that. And I would think that back in the day when you had traveled so far, this was a means of what we consider real fellowship.
Yes.
I mean, the visiting and
Right.
the getting to know people and to being with each other. But they may not have seen these people too much unless they were next door neighbors.
All right.
Back in those days.
Right. But it'd be a time, you're right, time of fellowship, time of, they'd sing, they do all of those things.
Eat, everything.
And it probably wasn't, we got to get this done within 3 hours. It was probably,
My grandmother used to tell me it was like from 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning till about 3 or 4 in
Yeah.
the afternoon.
Right.
And they would take their time doing all this, let the children play together.
Right. So there was fellowship there. You got to know one another, got to understand some things. And I think we're getting back to that. Although I've seen when we did this at one congregation where I was, that the people that were not there on the regular Sunday, Sunday night, after the meal, they'd leave anyway. They wouldn't be there for Sunday evening. And it was at 1 o'clock, 1:30. I mean, we got through, and they'd leave. I'm thinking, it's not but an hour, folks, at the most. And you can't sit another hour? All right.
I struggled with his tone just a little bit on this particular section. While I agree with his points,
Yes.
I don't think you can say that the act itself is unscriptural on a Sunday because it's a Sunday night. I mean, I think you could say the points he's making could lead to things that could become unscriptural, but I think it's hard to paint with a broad brush and just say that in and of itself it would be unscriptural to have it.
The group.
In small groups,
Yeah.
I think it is unscriptural.
Some things I would see is that it depends on the people in the groups. Some people like to always have meetings at their house. And it depends on who's meeting with them. If they're an alpha male or alpha female, they're gonna try to exert their influence, especially if they got something against, if they got some issues going on.
That's why I say I agree that the potential's there.
Yes.
But I don't think that you could point to anything specific that would say the act itself is unscriptural.
Not all the time. I mean, if you meet every Sunday and not
Well,
going to the church
Because
at all,
you could cancel the Sunday evening services altogether and nothing in scripture about that. Right? If the elders said, hey, we're going to meet on Sunday mornings, that's it. We're not doing anything else. There's nothing unscriptural about
No, there won't be no edification of the church.
It's the elder's decision. There's
Yeah,
nothing,
decision.
I'm not saying that there's not value in it. And I'm not saying there's not.
I understand what
wisdom.
you're saying.
There's nothing unscriptural.
Scriptural.
And I don't think you.
But
can do anything.
Just like if you had, instead of Wednesday night, some people think that's almost.
You can do it on
etched in
Thursday
stone.
night.
You
Yeah.
can do it on Tuesday, Thursday. I've known
Absolutely.
places who do it twice a week.
I understand what you're saying.
I'm not saying it's not dangerous. I'm just saying
The
his tone,
potential.
his tone paints it as it's unscriptural. And I think that's that's
But-
binding where I don't think the Bible.
But if the elders say be there,
No, I'm not, and I agree with that, but I'm saying if the elders make a decision that there is
Yeah.
no Sunday evening worship, and
All
they're
right.
saying,
But how can the elders be, if there's more than, say you got 4 elders, and there's more than 4 cottage meetings, how can the elders have rule over those meetings? They're responsible for the welfare of your soul.
I'm not saying it's not dangerous. I'm,
yes,
So
Let's
in
say
other
there's
words,
an
if you've
elder.
got 6 cottage meetings going on, you've only got 3 elders, then you've got an error right there. You got an error,
yeah.
well, if that's the
Because-
case, then the elders have to be in every Bible class.
but they're
I think-
governing the Bible
But
doctrine.
they
that's
don't
there.
know what's being taught in every
But
Bible.
They
class.
ought to know. They
Well,
ought.
But you could make the same argument on a small group now.
I understand. I understand.
And I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, to me, we gotta be careful not to follow it. If the elders
Yes.
speak the curriculum and say,
Right.
this is the curriculum. we're
Right.
gonna do
I understand what
Sunday
you're saying.
nights, that's no different than a Bible class.
It's like
In terms of how it's offered.
if and this happened, okay?
Yeah,
All right. We had a blizzard in Alabama. This was 1993 because we moved to Georgia in 94 and it flooded. And I'm thinking, man, what's happening with me everywhere I go? Something.
Yep.
Okay. We had to cancel worship because it was flat out dangerous.
Yep.
All right. Where I lived, though, we had enough Christians that we got together and worshiped God at
Yep.
one of the houses.
Yep.
Okay. I think that's right and good that we did that. But I understand what you're saying. If the elders called it out, all right, we had like
But you're
tornado
saying-
come through
He said that if they chose a curriculum, you don't have a curriculum for
for
worship.
worship.
but it doesn't have to be a worship, right? I mean, if you got together like that in a small group, what's the difference between the youth getting together and doing the Devo?
It just depends on who's leading the group. You gotta
Ah.
know who you got.
I don't disagree. And again, don't misunderstand, guys. I'm not saying I
I know,
support
we're,
it.
we're
I'm
discussing.
just saying,
Yeah.
you can't bind something, and even you're arguing about, there's nothing to say that an elder has to be at every single meeting that
Yeah.
occurs that the church does in any way.
That's true.
Well, ours aren't, I know.
But
You couldn't physically do it anyway.
Yeah,
but I think for our youth group too,
that's separate.
I think really elders need to be there.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
but it-
I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I understand, and that's my opinion about the idea that the elders need to be there because
Yeah.
they need
And
to
I
know.
agree with you 100%. I think the elders do. I don't disagree with that even
Yeah.
remotely. I
But
just think we gotta be careful not to bind it where it's not.
okay, I appreciate that. And you can see then also the idea that the dangers are there about,
Without a doubt.
and see, you
Without a
didn't,
doubt.
maybe you did, but the antis,
Oh, yeah.
okay, this is how they came in.
Oh, I know that this is how a lot of areas in
Church,
churches
okay.
starts and spot. I definitely think it's dangerous.
Okay.
I just felt the tone was it's unscriptural when I read it.
Yeah.
And I don't.
I understand
feel
what,
like some things that could come out of it would could 100% be unscriptural.
Right.
But I don't think just the practice is.
Think
Because-
about this, as Bible class, Sunday school as we called it most of our lives, I don't see any scripture in the
There's
Bible
not.
for that either. It talks about studying the Bible, studying together and having Bible study, but it doesn't talk about splitting up into classes. And that's where the antis got
Yeah.
into it by saying we can't split up in because we have no example, no apostolic, example for
Yeah.
that.
but I think we may not have apostolic example, but we have, I had to do a paper on this. I really had to preach it at a lectureship. But you go back to the Old Testament, when Moses and Moses' father-in-law came to him and said, you're going to wear yourself out and you're going to wear the people out.
Yeah,
All right, what advice did he give him?
get the elders.
He said, no.
Give
Delegate.
rulers over.
Well,
to
get
you.
rulers over.
All right, now, how did he get those men qualified to be the rulers? He had to have some classes and teaching them. So there's our precedents for the Bible class and teaching one another. Now, we know that,
I'm not saying it's not scriptural
Right.
to have a Bible
Class.
class, but that's
Right.
splitting up into, and I realize it's for expediency.
right,
That you can't have a 3-year-old sitting there listening to you preach and understand.
right. And I appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to get off track. I'm just.
No.
No,
that's what class.
I agree with the points, every
Yes.
single one of them.
Yes.
I just think there's a fine line that we have to be careful of sometimes.
I can appreciate that.
Understand
I appreciate that. I didn't get that from it.
Yeah.
And it might be because I agree with him on,
Wholesale man.
because I see the problems, and I've seen the problems on how
Yeah.
church problems can
Yep.
develop. And I've seen churches split over
Yep.
this type of thing. So that may affect me, and it may affect him because he's Dave Miller's the same age I am.
Yep.
And so when you've gone through that, you tend to take it, a harder,
Interesting.
a harder view. I won't say different, but I'll say a harder
Yep.
viewpoint on those things. So, okay, pretty much, and I like, he's got the elders then on page 276. He says they set up a potential hazardous situation. Elders lose their ability to shepherd on so many different groups of Christians. And I agree with that. That's, to me, point well taken about what you said. They don't have to be in every class. But, we also, if it's going to be, and we're getting into the time when weather may turn bad on Sunday night, we may call off our worship on
Yep.
Sunday. And I don't have a problem sometimes if it's so bad in the morning and so going to get bad in the evening, it's having at one time changing our worship time to a middle of the day when the roads are passable, and then they may freeze up at night or something like that.
Like our congregation,
we
we
may-
got people live way off
Yeah.
and people live right there at it, so.
So it may be that we get too geared
Doing things the same.
tradition.
Yeah.
This is the way we've always done it.
Yep.
And sometimes we need to break tradition.
Could we be more effective looking at what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Sunday morning fellowship meal,
That's
Sunday evening. And I think, Tommy, I believe South Cobb may do that, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know.
Where
I
our
thought-
youngest son's preaching,
I know Bill
they
Ritter
do
does.
that on the first, fourth Sunday,
Bill
first
Ricker-
Sunday.
I know
day.
Bill Ricken does it every week.
Yeah.
We
I know
did it only on fifth Sundays, there's like, 4 of those a
Yeah.
year or something.
we did, David, when in Columbus, at the congregation he was preaching at in Columbus, they did that every Sunday. Now, they may not eat together.
They did
Yeah.
it, they do it at
But-
West Connect too, once a month.
Okay.
They call it the eating meeting.
I kind of like it myself, but
Tara kind of does that to try to retain some of the people for the evening service.
yeah.
Because sometimes they don't want to come back, so they have the morning service and they have a break.
And then,
Well, you think about whether even, so to your point, if it's rural and you got people driving
Right.
20 miles or even here, it may take
Yeah.
45 minutes with traffic.
right.
They were
It
in
may
hilly
just be-
country too, it's
Uh,
kind of
And
dangerous.
when
Well,
gas
was-
gas
Oh,
Gallons a
yeah.
gallon, yeah. And so there may be that we need to look, the elders may need to consider some of those things. But like I said, when we did this at the congregation where I was preaching, they did this on the fifth Sunday, and the people that missed on Sunday night regularly left after the meal.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't stay that, and usually it's kind of abbreviated. It's not a full preaching for 45 minutes or so, something like that. So, I understand what you're saying there. I appreciate that. Sometimes there was some attitudes, I thought, some demeanor in the book that yeah,
Yeah, he's forceful. There's
Yeah.
no question about
Yeah.
it.
Oh, Dave Miller is.
yeah,
He's very, and you know what? Some of these, in my opinion, some of these topics are cut and dry.
Yeah.
Matters of salvation
right.
and scriptural. And then there's other areas I think that start to wade into just opinion a little bit, to a degree.
Yeah,
I felt like in the beginning of this book I started,
Yeah.
he was kind of around the edges,
Yeah.
But then as I kept on reading the book, I started seeing some good points in it.
Oh, he's.
you've got to understand the purpose of the book.
Mhm.
Okay, now it may not be that he is this way himself, but the purpose of the book is to get this point across.
Yeah.
And to show you what can lead to.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed.
Can lead to.
All right, now this idea with contemporary worship. This is out and out
That's
wrong.
out there.
Yeah.
Way out there.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
I agree.
Because this is a different kind of worship that we've talked about.
Usually centered around the music.
Yes,
Yeah.
they'll have bringing in the instrumental music rather than that kind of thing. So, you know, and he's done his research on this, and it says it's for the seeker, it's for the person who is the unchurched. Well, that's setting aside, to me, the gospel. The gospel needs to be God's power. That's what it always was, and it always will be. So it's wrong. Okay, we understand that. John chapter 4, verse 24, God is a spirit. They that worship him must worship him in spirit. That's a right attitude and in truth. That's according to his word, John 17:17. This is wrong worship.
Like says in one of more hips, so.
Yeah. Oh, look on page 278 right here. This is what I want. This is one. Let's be the first paragraph. It says, but change agents tell us that our worship assemblies are out of touch with current culture, and non-Christians cannot relate to our worship assemblies. I think that's, I agree with him. I mean, that's a false statement there. They insist that current cultures have conditioned people to experience music as watchers and listeners, but not participatory. I think that is even in the church today. If we got people that are participatory and not participants, and they need to be participants, we need to be teaching that when we're talking about worship, that they need to be in every act of worship. They need to be involved in our prayers, in our singing, and as a preacher, you watch how many people, especially on the invitation song, you usually can see this, and you're watching the congregation, how many people are singing or not singing.
Or leaving.
Yeah, we have some of those too. So it's just a disruption. 5 more minutes is not going to make that big a difference whether you get out or not.
Yep.
All right, now let's talk about children's church. Now, to me, children's church is different than having the nursery. We talked about that some last week. I'm not for having a attended nursery. I understand why some people do that, but I don't really, to me, that's not but one step towards children's church. Okay.
This made me think. So I will admit this chapter, and I've never thought a lot about children's worship. I've known about it. I've just never worshiped anywhere where it was an issue. But this chapter really got me. I don't believe it's right.
Right.
Straight. I do believe it's an unscriptural issue, but it made me think about some other things we do.
Okay.
We had in one church I attended when I was a child, and I had to go to children's worship, and it was weird.
Yeah.
It was really weird not to be sitting with my mother.
Now, there was a lectureship in Magnolia Bible College on this issue. Got a copy of it, and I meant to look this up. Bobby Duncan takes a weird issue because whereas he was preaching, they had children's church. And he was preaching at 6th Avenue in Jasper, Alabama. Okay? You know who preached there before he did?
Was it Wendell Winkler? Was it?
No.
Or, no, hang on. Gus Nichols. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
They had children's church there. All right. Now this, and he's right, this really developed out of the bus ministry, because the bus ministry, they were busing so many kids in and they didn't have parents there that they couldn't control them. So what they did, they put them in a different place to teach them. It started out with a good idea. Understand, every false doctrine starts out with a good idea. We're going to teach them how to sit still during our worship service, not disrupt the service, and then we're going to bring them in. That's a good idea, but that's not the way we need to do this, okay? When you're busing so many kids in, and I'm not against bus ministries, you got to understand what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to bus kids in to give parents a break on Sunday. We're trying to convert people. And to me, there's a difference between a bus ministry and picking people up and having
Babysit.
Yeah.
When I was growing on the south side, we had a bus ministry, and to me, that was just get a body in that pew.
Yeah.
That's what that was. Let me count the numbers. Let me get some heads in here to count.
All right. He gives 6 things. Okay. Several observations are in order, observations that reveal the fallacy of such thinking. First, past generations grew up attending the worship assembly with their parents. Their experience testifies to the fact that children's worship was unnecessary to their development and preparation for a Christian adulthood. When I grew up, I had to sit there. My parents then, when I got to the place that I wanted to sit with somebody else, I had to sit in front of them. And usually I sat with an older Christian lady too. Second, the adults who are needed to direct children's worship must forsake the assembling of the church themselves. And that's true. Thirdly, the rationale. While we're on that, the same could be said of a nursery that's attended. I think what you need to do is take your child there, discipline your child or feed your child, maybe whatever you need to do, and then come back out into the assembly. I don't think that, and I've seen it too many times, that mamas would take their bag and they'd take them back and it'd be a playtime. I think you need to, apply the Board of Education to the seat of learning. All right. And then bring them back out. The rationale says that children need their own service since they cannot get anything out of the adult assembly, which they only disrupt. It's simply a flawed rationale. Children can and should be disciplined to sit still and show respect to adult worship. And I agree with this. They need to learn those songs. There's a time and a place for us to sing songs. Jesus Loves Me. I think that's the song that we could sing in our assembly. But some of the other songs that we sing in our Bible class or in vacation Bible school, there's a proper place for that. But there are some songs that we need to sing for worship. What we call camp songs. Some of those I don't have a problem with singing. We sing them in our worship service assembly. But you need to come back to some other things that we've talked about this quarter, hand clapping and that type of thing too. Fourth, the way for children to learn to function in adult worship services is to be in that adult worship assembly. Transferring them to a casual fun and game setting only compounds the problem by accommodating a very childish and regular adult assemblies. I think that's what we're seeing in our culture today. Kids that have been pacified. All this rebellion that they're having right now. I see that as yeah. They get trophies for participation. Anyway, they need to be there. Okay, they need to be with their mommy and their daddies. Time, correct, and mature. All right, children's worship actually legitimizes the immature level of spirituality. Fifth, the Bible classes before the worship assemblies do everything that children's worship would claim to do, and I agree with that. Bible classes provide children with a teaching on the proper worship. They need to learn how to worship, and that he's talked about that. And they need to be in there with them. The formal assembly is when, and kids need to know how to sit still. They need to be learning that at school. When they witness firsthand their parents in church implementing teaching, Bible teaching learned in Bible classes. Sixth, where does the Bible authorize divided worship assembly? Did the early church divide into separate worship assemblies? Now, shall we divide the congregation into, and that, to me, this is where this is a good point. All right. Shall we divide the congregation into additional groups based on age, or dividing the church up for other consideration like gender or knowledge or spiritual maturity or social class? See, that does away with the unity of the church. And that's what he's talking about in several, in Ephesians. There's the oneness. There's other things that he's dealing with.
The last sentence that promotes actions and isolation.
Among them.
I think where you can get that with the divided Sunday evening.
Yeah. Yes.
So I had a question too as I read this one, just a thought I'd never thought about, but as I read that, and I've been to I've worshiped at congregations that do this both ways. I've worshiped at some congregations on Sunday night where the Lord's Supper is offered up front with everybody there, and then worship at congregations where they send them out. Would that be, if you send them out, is in that sense divided? Because they're worshiping by taking the Lord's Supper while the rest of the congregation's in there worshiping in song.
Yeah.
But yet, I just don't think, see, that's the difference we don't think about.
Yes,
Yeah,
That, to me, if we're gonna be consistent,
that's right.
you gotta,
That's right.
and I mean, we do that here. We send them out.
We do too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I grew up in a congregation where they go up front.
Yeah, well, I did too.
And where you last preached, where they went up front.
Right. And I agree with that.
I'd never thought about it until I read it. You know, as I was reading the book, I'm just thinking through,
Yeah. that's
Scenarios.
true.
Yeah.
yeah,
And
That's
I always wondered when they sent them out, because in Warner Robins Church, where I worship when I go to see my daughter, where, you know, Dave, Dominique, and all them
Yeah, Dave,
are,
yeah.
and the elders down there, like Glenn Hitchcock and all, they have everybody come up front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they say, everybody, you got, you know, come up front, and then say, but if you're not able to come up front, raise your hand.
Yeah.
And we'll serve you here.
that's how
And
much
so, yeah, and I thought,
I think-
I'm more comfortable with that.
Now, I think that's more scriptural.
I think it would be too, because you talk about worship, and now that seriously is.
Yeah.
Now, that is.
Now,
hard.
what's wrong with everybody taking the Lord's Supper again on Sunday night?
Oh, now you're really getting into it. Oh, man.
That's a good question.
You
I
see,
never even
again,
thought
and
of
All right, you have this group over here that has not had the opportunity,
Can you take it with?
and that's the whole idea.
Nothing that would
It's
prohibit it.
gonna be like the Baptist, we're gonna pass the collection plate every time we get together.
Didn't everybody just divide their contribution in half?
I shouldn't have stopped the meeting for them.